So welcome to this week's episode of Leaders on a Mission, where I'm joined by inspiring leaders driven by the impact of creating a healthy and sustainable world. Now, in today's episode, I'm joined by Graham Ellis, a partner at Presidium Capital, who are a specialist investor in the Agri-FoodTech space. Now, I've known Graham for a number of years, and he really brings a rich perspective in deal making and bringing novel technologies, to the marketplace, really across sustainable businesses, as broad as chemicals, food, nutrition, and personal care, to name but a few. And Graham, I really appreciate your time today. Thanks for joining me on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Simon. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. So tell me, Graham, give me some context around some of your early upbringing. I'm more thinking around some of those forces, the key forces, and some of those real key influences on you as you were kind of growing up.
Okay, so little known, so I don't discuss it that much, but I actually grew up in Somerset, and some of my earliest memories were actually sitting on a tractor. So coming back around to Agri-FoodTech is almost like doing a long loop. So I grew up in the West Country, and I sort of found by the time I was hitting my teens, it seemed like a rather small place, and I had chosen to study chemical engineering. And so the one thing I knew absolutely was there was no chemical engineering going to happen in darkest Somerset. So I was always set for a bit of travel and a bit of movement, whether it was simply within the UK or elsewhere. But I ended up studying at Loughborough for my first degree, and I think the most important thing I did was pick a company called UOP for the sandwich year. So the third year of the course was in industry, and was I sure what process technology licensing in the oil industry was at the time? No, but I was sure that it was happening in Chicago. And so that's where I got my sort of travel bug. And from there, I started just loving to sort of live in a place and understand it, understand the people and what made them tick. And I didn't really look back after that. In fact, post-graduation, went straight back to Chicago and then spent the following 5, 6, 7 years going all around the world, at the hard end of technology licensing and really what it means to bring new technology into being, albeit in the oil industry to start with. So we're going to talk about a complete U-turn.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like, as you were growing up, did you always know that you were going to travel first and foremost, and it was more about kind of getting out and traveling the world?
Well, I knew that my family as a whole did not travel, and I absolutely wanted to. So as far as I was concerned, it was an opposites moment. I'd spent far too long sitting still, therefore out and about. I need to get out and live in different places, learn about things. So yeah, I'd say probably by the time I was in my teens, I was looking for ways to live and work in other countries.
Yeah. And where did the chemical engineering come from, as it were? Like, what did your parents do?
So my father actually ended his career as head of defence procurement for the Navy. So there you go, oddball, but he actually came through from teaching. He had a strong mathematics background, so that gave me that within my psyche. We were always able to work together on things. My mother actually came from teaching as well, so I think that gives you a bit of sort of people psychology and things of that order. But I definitely took a lot from my dad in maths, and so knowing how to solve problems methodically was a big thing for him, and that's where engineering comes from. I liked chemistry, I liked maths, and I liked the application, and so that takes you straight to a chemie degree. I don't think my English teachers at Wells would ever have thought I was going to turn into a classic scholar, so definitely the direction for me.
Yeah, no, got it. And also, you found the renewable side of things at UOP pretty early, right? And then it looks like from that point onwards, your whole career has been really based around
exactly. So I think a lot of people won't have heard of UOP. It's now a part of Honeywell, but it's arguably one of the best technology licensing outfits in the world, and has been for years. So I think if I say that they invented probably 70 of the 75 processes used in oil refining, going all the way back to the sort of the 20s and 30s at the very beginning of the industry. They know how to develop a process, put it into the field, and make it happen. So I learned a huge amount about how you turn science into industry, and that's really what we we're doing in much of venture capital. So that was almost like a university of how do you do things, whether it was technical, legal, R&D. And as I finally exited UOP, I was like, wow, there was probably no better place to spend the first 15 to 18 years of my career. So renewables came along in the early 2000s with the biofuel revolution. So UOP as a leader in oil was thinking, oh, what do I do about the future? And so with Jennifer Holmgren, that I know you know at LanzaTech, we formed the UOP Renewables team. And I looked after fuels, and a colleague of mine looked after chemicals. And we started that out. That was very interesting. It took me into the European Union as we started to understand legislation and all the fundamentals that go into building a new industry. And it also got me looking outside of oil. From there, I think you start to look at feedstocks. If you're anywhere near anything to do with the renewable space, I ended up obviously figuring out that with others that palm and other solutions were never going to be sustainable. And we started looking very hard at alternate lipids, alternate crops. And ultimately that took me briefly to algae and camelina and some of the other new crops out there. And finally into the startup world. So yeah, I got involved very early in the 2000s, and it was I think 2008, 9 as the financial crisis hit, that biofuels really started to take off in the United States. And so it made a lot of sense for us to centralize the team in Chicago rather than having it spread across Europe and the US. And yeah, that gave me much more of a US outlook on how to roll things out.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I know you joined at the time Solozyme, right? How did you find that opportunity on the algae side?
Well, we were on the other side of the table for a while. So there was a program being run by the US Navy called the Great Green Fleet, and the challenge set by then the Secretary of the Navy, Mavis, was sort of harkens back to the days when they were trying to go from coal to oil. And there they held a fleet exercise where people had to come up with the perfect fuel. They ran an entire fleet on it, and that became the oil. So he looked forward and said, fine, what do I do about the Navy for the next century beyond me? And he came up with the Great Green Fleet. So we had to come up with the military jet standard, and had to come up with the military diesel standard, and we had to make it from renewable fuels. They wanted to see not just things being made from soy, they wanted to see new crops. So I worked very hard. I think in that year, I bought all of the United States camelina crop, which at the time was being worked on. And then we turned to algae because they really wanted to get algae into the mix. And Solozyme was the only company that stood up and did what it said it was going to do. And so at the time where we were having to try out a barrel of algal oil to see if we could convert it, they were the only company that could come through with a barrel. When it came to the first tank car rolling up to our small plant in Texas, they were the only ones that could put a full tank of algal oil into a rail car and get it down to Texas so that we could convert it. So ultimately, at UOP, I won 100% of that business. And we therefore got to see all of these different technologies. I negotiated on the other side of the table from Jonathan Harrison for some time. And I think we finally met for the first time at the COP in Copenhagen, where we were jointly showing this sort of combo UOP and Solozyme fuel and driving around dignitaries in various cars. And the offer was made that really I should be on the other side with them. So one thing led to another, and yes, I took the big leap. I think it was an interesting moment, because I think when you've had an interesting corporate career, and as I said, UOP was a fantastic place to be for the first 15, 16 years of my career, you always have in the back of your mind that are good things happening because the company is incredible, or am I individually able to make a difference? And I thought that going to Startup Land was a place where, yes, you still work as part of a team, but you can see if an individual is having their moment and really delivering something. And I wanted a challenge. And so I will say that working with Jonathan is a challenge, and it was great fun.
It was a great company, and had a incredible vision, and there was a lot that changed back in around that time, right? With the whole, I suppose, biotechnology for biofuels and the marketplace, and it was a very different environment to what it is now, right? And it was there was a lot of blood on the streets and quite a few failures in the end, but the technology was unbelievable, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think, when we were doing fuels at the beginning of my time with Solozyme, and that was before we switched over to things like personal care and animal feed, and we could get from there back into ag tech, we were already moving an awful lot faster than the generations before us, because if you look at where various of the US agencies had spent money over 20, 30 years trying to understand whether algae would ever be a possibility, we were light years ahead. Nobody had ever done fermentation at the scale that Solozyme pulled off. I think people like Peter Licari and Scott Franklin were able to do things in algae which nobody had ever dreamed of. I mean, actually creating things like cocoa butter alternates from algae, which I probably still have to borrow that chocolate hidden away somewhere. Making the ultimate and heart-healthy oil, having full control of structuring, those are incredible things. But I also remember seeing that we had probably a bank of 10 to 20 machines lined up on the side. And now that would be small if I were to look at sort of the foundry of Ginkgo or something like that, where the same work is happening on 10, 20, 50 times the scale. So yeah, the tools are the key thing. They've changed so fast. We didn't have CRISPR as we were coming through. We had to do it in different modes, and we're literally inventing the ways to make these modifications on the fly. I always remember, the idea that you didn't even have a measurement. Nobody had an ASTM method to be able to measure the amount of lipid in algae. Well, you've got to invent the method to measure it before you can figure out what you've done. So that's when you're on the cutting edge of new technology.
Yeah, and it moves so quickly as well, doesn't it? Really, it's just like certainly looking back over the last 10 years, how much it's moved.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if I compare the companies we're looking at today, some of them are trying to do very much the same thing, but they're trying to do it with vastly superior tools. And so you see it in even alternative dairy and things like that, the rate at which somebody can catch up. If I'm perfect day, I may be first and I may be big, but there are people who can catch up and get very, very close incredibly fast. So I think fast followers are going to be something worth looking at in the space for sure, simply because the tools are available and you can buy the research, and we're probably missing more team members than we are equipment now and methods.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think about the ag and food tech space, it's exploded, right, over the last couple of years. When did you start seeing the first explosion around it? When did you first start really seeing the change?
It's really only happened over the past sort of 3 to 5 years. So you might actually compare it to sort of biotech and life sciences pharma. If you went back to the beginning, they were sort of investing at a VC level, sort of 2-3 billion a year at the beginning of the toolkit and the understanding, and that shot up and went exponential. And it took about 10 to 15 years to do that. What we're seeing in ag and food tech is an imperative that's driven by society, so things are happening a lot faster. So if you go back 5-10 years, again, it was single-digit billions. Now we're looking at hundreds coming into the venture space. I wonder if we'll actually beat 100 in the next year or two as rounds coming into venture capital. How it's deployed, different question, but yeah, it's going absolutely crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with you going, with you joining Solozyme at that time, you've really now spent your career since then in early stage, smaller companies, where it's really all about bringing kind of technology, to the marketplace as well. And can never see you. I can never see you back in a corporate world back in the day. I think you love it too.
No names, but I tried a couple of years ago to think about it, and I couldn't get there. I think the difference was what Solozyme taught me and other companies is you should really exist on what you're achieved. You know, the idea of handcuffs to stop somebody leaving or making somebody stay is silly, right? So when I started to look at how a corporate contract went together, I'm like, well, wow, what if we're not a good fit? Why are you spending a year trying to hold me back from going? You know, I'm either delivering for you or I'm not. And I think, no, a corporate environment is a very complex place to try and deliver something new. And above all, I like doing new things. So, you know, it was difficult inside UOP, and they arguably got it right. You know, they squirreled us away into a little group, so we were like a startup within a large corporate, but we didn't really have strong reporting lines, and we were able to do things that company had never done before. And I thank Carlos Cabrera, the CEO at the time, for actually allowing us to operate at quite such arm's length. But that was the only reason that was successful. We could be that radical. Had we tried to deliver it within the confines of sort of the standard production half of UOP, couldn't have happened. Yeah. So no, I think you'll probably find me on the startup side. And I wouldn't say I'm a 0 to 10 people type person. I don't think you come to me for the idea, but I do love building businesses. I know how to do business development, and I love nurturing people and trying to understand the business problem. But not for me thinking up the idea or spotting the opportunity inside the lab. Yeah, and that's how we've worked together with some of even the algae space now. It's great because I love the algae space, and it's great to see so many different players and so many different technologies, out there, as it were. And I know that you give a lot of your time and assistance and helping nurture innovators and helping innovate people that have that great idea and they need more of an outlet, and I think more of a structure on how to get it to market, really. I think arguably, Sam, that's how I got to venture capital. I mean, I enjoy operating companies. The time with Ocean Harvest has been fantastic. But as you say, I was also advising small companies how to advance, helping them through their problems. And I like that a great deal. So the idea at BC that I can first select the companies I'd love to work with, and then spend those critical 3, 4, 5 years helping them grow, it seems almost the perfect job. And I think when you've had a career in large corps and you've had a career in small corps, then you can see the whole development path, what has to change over the growth of the company, and that's quite unique. Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about Presidium Capital in terms of what they do and the markets they serve. Yeah, so Presidium was founded as an Italian private equity group, backed mainly by the families of Northern European entrepreneurial family companies. So I won't mention any of them because we tend to like to keep them under wraps, but I'm sure your viewers could probably guess the sorts of families we work with. So all of these people have been entrepreneurs themselves. Maybe they've exited their companies, maybe they haven't, but they're a very supportive group. So the original Presidium was seeking to help them invest in private equity with their family offices. And they went by themes, whether it be sort of venture capital or healthcare or tech or any of those types of things. When it came to Agri-FoodTech, the families were saying, look, we can see this world starting to grow, but you guys don't have an offering. So we reviewed it, and Alessandro Poli, the founder of Presidium, basically came to the conclusion there isn't good private equity going on in this space. The technology doesn't really exist. The infrastructure around new ag and food tech world really isn't there. There aren't many IPOs, there aren't many takeovers. We have to go direct, and it has to be venture because much of this stuff is early. And so I got a call, and it was, okay, here's a blank piece of paper. If you had to do ag and food tech, what would you do? And that was quite a call to take, actually, and very exciting to be able to look at it from that perspective. Yeah, no, great. It's exciting. So what segments, because your approach is a little bit different, isn't it, in terms of it's quite thesis and data driven. So tell me a little bit around that and around the segments that you're serving. Absolutely. So we spend a little bit of time trying to understand the gaps, and being an engineer, I have a habit of liking data. So as we looked at it, there were certain areas of ag tech and food tech which was on fire. A lot of money was going in, prices were all over the place, and it wasn't necessarily going in from people who really understood the business. So let's take things like last mile delivery or making new veggie burgers or alternative burgers, huge household names, almost retail investment level, prices down the roof, and very US driven. On the other hand, I looked to Europe, and I'll call that Greater Europe with Israel and the UK thrown in, and I was seeing fantastic technology being developed, but maybe they didn't have access to the right capital, and maybe they didn't have access to the right sort of assistance. So we discarded brand building, we discarded last mile delivery, and we said, okay, what are the tools that the industry requires to transform itself? And this is very much a picks and shovels approach. You know, we want to supply picks and shovels to the gold miner. We'll let the gold miner go figure out if he can make it fly. And so that's how we started looking. I guess one term would be deep tech version of Agri-FoodTech. Now, we looked across the whole space and we said there are opportunities all the way up into agriculture and aquaculture. And then we go all the way through ingredients, novel ingredients, and down to the consumer, but we stop before the brand. And I think there are some other areas around that, like alternative packaging and food waste reduction, which are of interest, but we can operate across that entire span, providing we are seeing a defensible technology, which typically will have a B2B outcome. So that's the space we like. We then looked at funding in Europe and we said, wow, people move quite slowly with their startups in Europe. That might be a bit of an naughty thing to say, but I think in a way, many European countries have so many grants that you can start a company and you can just sort of drip feed it, and you can go through those first 3, 4, 5 years on grants and friends and family, as opposed to the United States, where you'd be straight in with angel funding followed by a seed round. So you get these early phases growing slow. There's a lot of seed money around, but after seed, there's a handful, if that, of funds who can take you from late seed, A, B, if you're deep tech and delivering something like this. And so that became our space. We know that when you get out to a B round or a C round and you've got a company in clear growth mode, that there are generalist venture capital companies and some very large ones that can take you forward. But very few people were equipped to deal with commercializing a technology from the first dollar through to a decent level of growth. And so I said, all right, well, I have an engineering background. I've done that myself on a few different technologies. That's where we want to set up shop. And so we then set about creating a team that could do that. We made it a very operationally focused team. So incredibly lucky with Summer Advisory Group. I think you met Luc Matisse in one of your recent discussions. He looks after crop tech and is an advisor to that. We have Jean Spence, who was the former head of R&D at Kraft Mondelez for many years. And so she gives us the voice of big food. Won't get much past her if it's unlikely to commercialize inside a company. We have a famous Italian entrepreneur, Gianpaolo Cagnin, who has himself grown and exited now, I think, 3 companies in alternative ingredients. And even within the team, we like to have dual purpose. So Dalton, one of our team, is also a vet for Rothschilds. Okay, so that's not a combo you find often. And Alice brings, we took her out of European Food Safety Authority. So we have EFSA inside the wall, which is fantastic for either advising companies or understanding them.
Tell me, what do you think? I mean, really interesting and great space. What do you think the skills required to be an investor and deploying capital as opposed to being, an operator of a company?
I think that's a great question. I mean, ultimately, our job is to get the maximum returns we can for our backers. But when it comes to understanding a business plan and trying to find the weaknesses in it so that you can help, I think operators have a clear advantage there. And I will say that we've now worked with a number of other VCs, and I find that our diligence tends to be a lot deeper because we're willing to go in and push the assumptions and understand what's going on. And so I think in deep tech, I think it's worth having people who really understand this type of thing. If you're in something which is a bit broader, maybe aimed at the consumer, it's a different set of skills. But I think that the more that you can bring people in who've done it before, or who have real insight they can give, that's more likely to make you a successful investor, or I should say at least narrow the odds. And I would say these comments are also based on phase of investing. If you're in seed mode, you're basically betting a great founder and a great idea. There is little data that you can actually go for. So there you must experience by default a greater failure rate. When you're later phase and you're starting investments A and B, it's a proven hypothesis. You've got some data. You might even have people with JDAs or even a first customer, dare I say. Therefore, you've got a different set of data to work with. That's useful for us. And so I think you have a different team depending on which phase of venture you like. And it's been quite fun actually segmenting this and understanding how you make decisions differently. You know, on a 500,000 seed investment, you can't afford to do due diligence, right? You can't spend 100,000 going through somebody's finances, legal, commercial, etc. It's just not possible or feasible. So the first time you can actually study a company is when they're raising a decent multiple of millions, because that work takes time, effort, and cash to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I suppose it's interesting with first-time CEOs and founders, because you've been on the other side of the fence now, right, over years and years. So you know what it takes to deploy some of this technology and bring it to market. And it always strikes me that there's always an expectation that we can get things into the market quicker than the food industry allows. I'm not sure if that's something that you kind of see as a trend when you talk to companies, for instance, around those expectations.
Yes, it is. And I have to be really careful as well, because one of the things that I'm passionate about is that in San Francisco, when you have an idea, 10 people stand up and say, how can I help you? And in some European capitals, they stand up and tell you all the reasons why it will never succeed. So I don't want to become that guy, right? On the other hand, you can help people understand that, look, there is a sequence here. You are going to have to understand that you want that big deal with Unilever, or you want that big deal with Nestle. They have a timeline, and there are reasons why they can't shorten that. So we do bring a little bit of reality where we can, but at the same time, incredibly important not to stand on somebody's dreams, right? It's a balancing act. And I know what that's like from the CEO seat or from the business development side when I'm there trying to get that deal with Big Co, whoever that may be.
It's fascinating because in Silicon Valley and South San Francisco, it's almost like the mentality is it's a blank sheet of paper and this is the dream. And, regardless of how realistic it is, in Europe, there's that mentality, isn't there, that one has to get over, and probably could learn a little bit from the American kind of influence around that, basically,
I think the happy medium is probably somewhere in the Azores, Simon.
Right.
so you can see plenty of ideas being funded on the West Coast which shouldn't see the light of day, and they get an astonishing valuation for almost nothing. And at the same time, you see equally good ideas in Europe getting no money at all or inching their way through. The idea is we've got to find ways of getting to those visions which we can support and give them the right amount of money. You hate to see huge numbers disappearing down a hole because it was given to them. I think you do sort of earn your stripes in Europe if you have to eke your way through a small amount of money to generate a big impact or a big proof point. That's great. It'll always make you look after money better than somebody who's always had more than they need in a way. But at the same time, speed is of the essence. We don't want to be losing the race every time and coming up with the perfect burger 3 years after somebody else launched it because they had a spare 50 million to throw into the marketing. So I think a happy medium is what we're looking for between the two areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And tell me though, just on the European context, when you look across Europe, where have you really seen have you seen that infrastructure and that ecosystem grow and develop? And in America, it's mature now. It seems to be developing here. And what's your view on where we are?
So why don't we look at Silicon Valley for a second? Because that whole area I think it's geographically important to understand that you're on the peninsula. You have universities like Stanford, Berkeley right there. You have an incredibly expensive place to live. So if you aren't successful, you tend to get rejected straight out of the zone. So you end up with a certain type of person who's been able to make it. You're geographically constrained. When somebody is successful in San Francisco, they don't tend to turn around and say, look at my new Aston Martin. They tend to turn around, put it straight back into angel money. And the boast is going to be, look, I found Facebook first and I put some of my money back into that. So it's that whole existence of early money being available from people who've been successful straight into Sand Hill Road, people piling out of Stanford and Berkeley to be able to help you build a company or to have those ideas. And it all works together in a melting pot, which is just spinning out company after company. If you compare that with Europe, we don't have a geographical ability to do the same thing. There is no peninsula where we're all hemmed in one location and nowhere to go. But you do have some of these things going on. So Berlin has an amazing ecosystem which is built up around seed funding and a lot of bright people and good education and lots of sort of medium-sized entrepreneurial companies in Germany who want to join in the whole thing. So I think they have a pretty good infrastructure. In this country, we do it pretty well, I think, up to a certain point. And then how do you grow into your mega company? I think we're still struggling with. And one couldn't have this conversation without talking Israel. You look at the number of companies that a country that's that size is managing to do is amazing. And they have a small population, they have limited agriculture, so everything has to get commercialized in the world outside of Israel. And so that's how they think. They come up with their idea and then they go take it to the world. And I think it was astonishing. I went to the Future of Foods conference in San Francisco a few weeks ago. Great event. So good to see people face to face again. In the new company hub room, I think more than half of the companies there were Israeli actually. So yeah, we have bits and pieces. So you might argue that Israel is possibly closer to San Francisco than other regions because they are geographically constrained. Some great universities, some innovative people, a bit of money there to start them off. But it's tough to put all of those ingredients together in the same place to create that buzz that you get when you're in on the peninsula of San Francisco.
Yeah. Although I think the challenge I see with some of the Israeli tech firms is more how they internationalize, for instance. That's probably more the challenge, for instance, in terms of bringing those technologies over to the US and to Europe and to, I suppose, have people in those regions, non-Israeli people, that know the local markets and customers and opportunities.
Yeah, but it's equally the same challenge for some US startups who are scared stiff of coming into Europe, or vice versa. So everybody's going to struggle with internationalization to a certain extent, but it's if you look at where the bubbling technologies are sitting and where the ideas are coming out, it's hard to argue that's that small piece of land there off the in Israel is not generating more than its fair share of great ideas, especially in agtech and food tech. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? When you consider the future, I mean, because I know I think there's so many technologies, there's so much stuff, specifically in the alternative protein. There's so much press out there around the harmful effects of animal agriculture. Tell me, what does, in an ideal world, future-wise, do we have no animal agriculture? What happens to the grasslands? I hear so many different opinions, and I'd love just to hear your thoughts on, how we can survive and thrive as a planet and a species and get the balance right.
Well, I'm more of a pragmatist. I would love to take a few steps forward than having to leap straight to the end result. So, are we going to wipe out all cows from the planet in the next 15 to 20 years? No, we've had them for many, many centuries, and they're going to be there. The question is, can we deal with population growth, the requirement for protein, and have a bit of a shift in how we do it, so that we can fit into a finite piece of land and a finite capacity of ocean. And at the moment, the maths does not work, right? So how can you do it? If you look at the efficiency of a cow versus a Beyond Meat burger, you're sort of 7-1 on land. So yes, you can say to yourself, if I head in that direction, I theoretically got 2 to 3x the amount of capacity to feed humans if we all become, in essence, vegetarians or vegans, or cell-based ag would have us somewhere in between the two. So there are big shifts, but I don't think we will end all of these things. I think the biggest step we can have to start with is, will every family think about having a day without meat or a couple of evenings a week? Will we consider beef to be more of a treat than ground beef happening 3-4 times a week in some families? That's how we'll start to shift. And I think our job as VCs and developers of technology is to make sure that there are really plausible alternatives out there, so that people don't feel that they have missed out. Consumers are going to be much more willing to shift if they haven't had to give up anything, or see things change in a way that's too dramatic. We don't want to create the shocks that we're currently going through in the world. I mean, I wonder if the huge inflation we are now seeing in food as a result of the crisis in Ukraine will speed up some of these adoption habits, but it's probably not the way we want to do it. You don't want to force consumers to take a different food product because they can't afford the ones they had before. It's much better if they go, wow, I really enjoyed that alternative meat. I'm going to have that on Tuesday this week because I'm making a dish which doesn't require me to put a steak in the center of the plate. So forcing people isn't probably the right mechanism, but it will certainly have some effect on consumer choice. So 10 to 15 years out, we will have certainly more vegetarian meals, absolutely no question. We will have had to slide towards less expansion or contraction even of the dairy industry and the beef industry, simply because we can't make the maths work unless we get rid of the rest of the rainforests, and we aren't willing to do those sorts of things. So making the maths work is the hardest thing. I think things that strike me as disgusting that we have to get over are, in aquaculture, we've long since reached peak in the oceans of what we can harvest. Every incremental kilo of seafood that we consume now has to come from aquaculture. Yet we have very big questions about the standard of aquaculture in the world. If you've flown over Latin America or Southeast Asia and seen the shrimp farms, is that the way you want to expand? Are you comfortable with the runoff going into the oceans? Are we comfortable with the sea lice problem going on in Norway for salmon? So there has to be something shifting. We can't simply do more of that, and we can't fish more out of the ocean. So what a fantastic opportunity for the blue economy, a place we love to look to find innovation. What else? Food waste. It's incredible at a time when we have people starving that 30% of the food that we produce is wasted. I mean, think what that can do. If that 30% is actually being consumed, we now have an oversupply of food on the planet. So there are many things we can do to shift things without having to completely dismantle animal infrastructure. But I put it back to you as a theory. Why do we have animals, Simon? What's the reason?
Well, there are a few reasons. Well, first of all, we have animals as I think to chew and to eat the grasslands, for instance. To keep the nutrition and to keep things not becoming barren and desert-like, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, they have a role in the environment, and they also have a strong role for humans. I mean, what you probably notice on the planet is we grow a huge amount of carbohydrates, corn, wheat, grains. We don't grow that much protein. The most efficient source we have at the moment of protein is turning those carbohydrates into protein using an animal to do it. And so, a chicken is a very good way of turning corn and soy into protein that we like to consume. A salmon is another good and very efficient way of doing it. Beef is great because it can convert grass, which we don't want to eat, into something that we do want to eat. So they're fundamental protein conversion systems that taste fantastic. So, when you're looking at alternative and all the opportunities there, well, we have to find things which are that efficient or better, and then we can adjust what we're growing. So why not ferment a protein inside a vessel? You can use the same corn feedstock that I was going to give my cow, but I'll only use 20% of it to make the same output. So great, I've just freed up a part of the world to say, do I need it A, for more food, or B, should we rewild it? Maybe we get to replant the Amazon if we all give up a Sunday roast. We'll have to see how far we can push that.
Absolutely. Lots of, there's certainly no shortage of technology that can address these issues and questions. I think the question is much more going to be, I think, around commercialization and deployment and scale. Yeah, what do you see as being the challenges, for us to really?
Yeah, I mean, when we look at decks and we look at people's visions, and again, trying not to stand on dreams, but you will often see somebody present a fermentation solution into the hundreds of thousands of tons a year, and you ask them, where is the 3-4 billion of capital coming from for you to build out your fermentation capacity in your plants? Have you thought about all of the feedstock? Are you building this in Brazil where you're going to get enough sugar? Are you building it in the Midwest? How exactly are you going to deliver on this dream? And there'll usually be some mumbling about contract manufacturing and somebody else's, but no, it's all full. There's very little spare right now. I mean, at Solozyme, we built, 3,000 cubic meters, which is probably one of the largest ones built in recent years. It just isn't there. So we have to have an opportunity, and I think this is the big challenge. All of these fermentation technologies, they need capacity. And unfortunately, venture capitalists like myself aren't keen on project finance because the returns on that are low. So there's a meeting of the minds somewhere where once you've got a commercial technology, how do we get money in which is comfortable with a 5, 10, 15% return to build that infrastructure for them so that we can then get the output? I think, I don't know how your pension's doing, but I think my pension would probably love to have a stream of 10 or 15% return coming out of it. So the options have to be there, but the whole world isn't yet linked up to make this happen. When Solazyme built its first major facility down in Brazil, that was a tough one. We ended up having to get the support of the Brazilian National Development Bank to make that happen, and a fantastic program that they ran, really trying to bring in new technology which would leverage their sugar asset. But those programs don't exist in many locations. So I think scale up for the fermentation world is a big deal, and that's what comes after biotech. So what I'm always looking at is, it's one challenge to create a bug which can do something. It's another challenge to scale it up. A third challenge to actually build the capacity, and then you still have the business development of who's going to buy your product. Are you taking it to market yourself? Do you need a big deal with a company to make it happen? So there's a lot of challenges getting these things done, and that's why you have to bet on great founders and support them incredibly hard. There aren't many people that have done it.
Yeah, absolutely. Graham, look, we could chat all day. I mean, listen, that's been great. I loved chatting with you about this and hearing your opinions, and great discussion. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's where we spend every day, and it's an exciting space to be in, and we're working with some fantastic companies at the moment. So watch that portfolio grow.